When I woke up from the surgery, I thought I was stepping into a new life, but I had no idea I was stepping into a nightmare. I remember that first morning vividly. The sterile smell of antiseptic clung to the hospital room like a ghost I couldn't shake. My throat was dry, my body aching in ways I didn't know were possible. Tubes and monitors hummed quietly around me, and the sunlight sliced through the blinds, casting thin golden stripes across the white walls. For a moment, I allowed myself to smile. I had done something incredible. I had given my sister a second chance at life. My kidney, my gift. I thought that gesture of love would seal the bond between us forever. But life has a cruel way of twisting the purest intentions into pain. I lay there, listening to the faint beeping of the heart monitor, thinking about how this whole thing had started. My sister, Clara, had always been a fragile soul, fragile, yet persistent in her ability to command attention. She had fallen ill years ago, a kidney failure diagnosis that hit our family like a thunderclap. I'd held her hand through every appointment, every hospital stay, every moment of despair. I couldn't imagine losing her. She was my sister, my family, my mirror. So, when the doctors asked if I would be a match, I didn't hesitate. I didn't even pause. I volunteered. The hospital tests confirmed I was compatible, and before I knew it, the day of surgery arrived. The morning I went under the knife, my husband, Mark, squeezed my hand in the waiting room, his warm eyes holding mine. "You're saving her," he whispered. "She's lucky to have you." Lucky. I thought about that word a lot in the following days. I had always been the responsible one, steady, dependable, the kind of sister who remembered birthdays, who answered the phone at 2 a.m, who never kept grudges. Clara, on the other hand, was spontaneous, a little reckless, the kind of sister who could charm anyone into forgetting their own worries. I loved her for it, truly, even if sometimes it grated on me. Recovery was brutal. The incision stung, my energy was sapped, and even moving from the bed to the chair felt like climbing a mountain. Mark never left my side, and in those first moments of vulnerability, I thought I'd never felt closer to him. He kissed my forehead, whispered that I was incredible, and reminded me to breathe. The first few weeks were a blur of painkillers, fatigue, and hospital visits to check on Clara. She was improving faster than anyone expected. She smiled more now, the pale look in her cheeks replaced with a flush of vitality I had always envied in her. Watching her walk without assistance, laughing at jokes she used to grimace through, I felt a warmth in my chest. I was proud. I had saved her life. But then, the first subtle thing happened. It was nothing, really, just a feeling, a small, misplaced glance, a shared joke between Clara and Mark that lingered a little too long. I told myself I was imagining it. Mark was my husband, Clara was my sister. Nothing could happen between them, right? I began noticing other little things. My phone would buzz with notifications, messages from Mark, read instantly, yet sometimes I'd see him slip out to answer a call from Clara. Little hints that made me frown, hushed tones in the kitchen, laughter from the living room when I was supposed to be resting, doors closing gently, then opening quickly. At first, I convinced myself it was all in my head. I wanted to believe in the goodness of my family, in the loyalty of my husband, in the bond one shared with my sister. But doubt is a dangerous companion. One evening, about 3 weeks after my surgery, Clara had insisted on preparing dinner for us, claiming it was her way of thanking me. I sat in the living room, wrapped in a blanket, sipping tea, listening to the faint clink of pots. I could hear her humming, a soft tune I hadn't heard in years. It should have been comforting, but instead, my chest tightened. There was something in the tone of her laughter, something familiar and intimate that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Mark came into the room with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Dinner smells amazing," he said. But even as he spoke, I noticed the way his hand brushed against hers as she passed him a plate. Not an accidental brush, no, the kind of touch that held a secret. I forced a smile, told myself I was being paranoid. Days passed, each one dripping slowly into the next. My body healed, but my mind was restless. The feeling of unease grew, wrapping around me like a shadow I couldn't shake. Clara would call me late at night, claiming to be tired or lonely, and Mark would answer too quickly, his voice soft in a way that made my stomach churn. I wanted to confront them, but the thought of being wrong, of shattering the fragile recovery I'd been through, held me back. Then, it happened. It was an ordinary Thursday. I had insisted on leaving the house for a short walk, fresh air, the smell of autumn leaves, a chance to stretch my legs without relying on Mark. When I returned, I found the door to our bedroom slightly ajar. At first, I thought nothing of it, until I heard them. Laughing. Whispering. Not just casual conversation, something intimate, dangerous, that immediately set my heart hammering. I froze in the hallway, listening. The words were muffled, but the tone, the way Mark said her name, the softness in Clara's voice, it shattered me. Everything I had believed, everything I had sacrificed, collided in that instant. I wanted to scream, to rush in and demand an explanation, but my body wouldn't move. My mind spiraled through disbelief, denial, and heartbreak all at once. I backed away slowly, tears blurring my vision, the taste of iron in my mouth. My gift, my kidney, my sacrifice, had become the stage for their betrayal. Every ounce of love I had poured into my sister, every moment of trust, every late-night vigil, every prayer I whispered over her hospital bed, mocked by the very people I loved. I spent the night awake, replaying every glance, every laugh, every gesture I had brushed off as harmless. Each memory now seemed tainted, each kind word a lie. And somewhere deep inside me, beneath the shock, a quiet, simmering anger began to take root. I realized then, lying on that bed, staring at the ceiling with tears drying on my cheeks, that nothing would ever be the same. Not my marriage. Not my sisterhood. Not my sense of self. And I also realized something else, I wouldn't let this betrayal define me. The days after that night were a strange blend of routine and inner chaos. On the outside, I smiled, I nodded, I played the part of the recovering sister and dutiful wife. But inside, a storm raged. Every laugh between Clara and Mark felt like a dagger twisting in my chest. Every casual comment, every shared secret, reminded me that my love, my sacrifice, had been taken for granted. I tried to focus on my healing. The incision was closing, my strength returning, but emotional wounds are far trickier to mend. I spent hours sitting by the window, hands wrapped around a cup of tea, watching neighbors walk their dogs, kids chasing each other down the street, couples holding hands without a care. I wondered how easily some people could love, and how easily mine had been twisted into something unrecognizable. It wasn't long before the first clue that I could no longer ignore appeared. I had been going through our shared email account, the one Mark and I used for household bills and the occasional family correspondence, when I saw it, a thread labeled in Clara's handwriting, something that seemed innocuous at first, a family update. But the more I read, the more my stomach sank. The messages were full of inside jokes between her and Mark, little plans, subtle references to private moments that should have been mine alone. I remember the moment I realized it wasn't harmless. My hand shook, my chest tightened, and I had to sit down. I read through every message twice, 3 times, looking for something I could convince myself was innocent. There wasn't a single word that could be explained away. The warmth in their tone, the familiarity, the teasing, it all pointed to a connection far deeper than mere friendship. I confronted Clara first. I needed to hear her lie to my face. I wanted to see if there was even a shred of guilt. I need to know the truth, I said one evening, my voice quieter than I intended. My body still ached from the surgery, but adrenaline carried me through. We were in the kitchen, the smell of garlic and sautéed onions filled the air. She looked up from chopping vegetables, her eyes widening in a way that immediately set off alarms. "What do you mean?" she asked, feigning confusion. "I know something's going on," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Between you and Mark. I don't know how long it's been happening, but I know you're hiding something from me." Her hands froze mid-chop. The knife clinked against the cutting board like a warning bell. "What are you talking about?" she whispered, voice trembling ever so slightly. I stepped closer. "Don't lie to me, Clara. I've been ignoring signs for weeks. The messages, the late-night calls, the way you two look at each other. I thought I could trust you. I thought giving you my kidney would make you grateful, but maybe I was wrong." Her face changed, the mask slipping. For a brief second, I saw something I hadn't expected, fear. And then, finally, the truth. It just happened," she said, words stumbling out. "I didn't plan it. I didn't mean for it to. Don't, I snapped, voice rising slightly. Don't even try to explain. I gave you a part of myself, Clara. I gave you life, and this is what you've done. Betrayed me? She looked down, silent now, unable to meet my gaze. I left the kitchen, my legs trembling, my body shaking not from weakness but from fury. I didn't know whether to cry or scream, whether to run or stay and face the two people I had loved the most in this world. I retreated to our bedroom, slammed the door, and let the tears come freely. That night, I lay awake, replaying every memory, every moment where they might have shared a secret glance or touch. My mind raced with questions I didn't want to know the answers to, yet I needed the full truth before I could act. I realized then that I needed proof, something undeniable, something concrete, before confronting Mark. I couldn't rely on emotions alone. The next few days became a careful, almost surgical observation. I watched them, listened for slips, kept track of phone calls, their schedules. I learned to move quietly, to notice the subtle exchanges, the fleeting touches, the laughter that didn't include me. The more I watched, the more evident it became, they had been intimate while I was recovering, while I was vulnerable and healing. My gift, my love, my trust, it had been twisted into a secret world I wasn't allowed to enter. It wasn't easy, maintaining the facade. I cooked, I smiled, I laughed at jokes, I asked about their days. All the while, I plotted quietly, carefully. I wasn't going to react rashly. Revenge wasn't about instant gratification, it was about dignity, about exposing truth without losing my own sense of self. And so, I began collecting evidence. Messages saved, photos unnoticed, receipts, anything that could show the extent of their betrayal. I was methodical. I didn't want to be accused of paranoia or jealousy, I wanted undeniable proof. But the real turning point came one afternoon when I overheard a conversation in the garden. They didn't know I was there. Clara leaned against the railing, her voice soft, intimate. I can't believe she did this for me, she said, her tone almost tender, almost admiring. She gave me her kidney. And you're hers now, aren't you? I froze. Every word sliced through me like glass. Mark's chuckle, soft and familiar, followed. She saved you, he replied. And now, I don't have to hide anything with you. I felt my knees go weak. The audacity, the cruelty, the sheer audacious betrayal, they had taken the very thing I had given freely and used it to justify their affair. Rage bubbled under my skin, coiling like a snake ready to strike. I retreated inside, locked the door, and sat on the floor, hands pressed to my face. I let the tears come, not from weakness, but from the realization that my life had been invaded in the most intimate, gut-wrenching way imaginable. My marriage, my sisterhood, my trust, destroyed. That night, I made a decision. I wouldn't be a victim. I wouldn't let this define the rest of my life. But I needed to act carefully. Revenge, yes, but smart, controlled, and dignified. The plan didn't come to me all at once. It took nights of pacing the apartment, sleepless hours, tea gone cold in my hands while I plotted quietly. I wasn't thinking about petty revenge, no, this was about truth, about justice, about reclaiming the dignity they had trampled over. I would make them face what they had done, in a way that couldn't be ignored or denied. The first step was confrontation, but I had to be strategic. I started keeping a journal, meticulously documenting every interaction, every suspicious message, every whispered conversation I overheard. The entries were raw, but they would serve as evidence. Not just to show them, but to show myself that I wasn't losing my mind. Mark noticed the change in me immediately. I was quieter, more deliberate, less available for their shared smiles and jokes. He tried slipping back into the comfort of routine, kissing my hand, offering tea, speaking in that soft, coaxing voice, but I was no longer fooled. I'm fine, I said one morning, brushing past him in the kitchen, not meeting his eyes. The tension was palpable, and I could see it, his frustration, his uncertainty. For the first time I realized he was scared. I decided to confront Clara first. I invited her to the garden under the guise of helping me with some planting, I knew she'd come. She arrived, cheerful, oblivious, humming a tune I once loved. "I need to talk," I said, my voice steady. She stopped, eyebrows raised. "About?" she asked casually, wiping her hands on her apron. "You know what I'm talking about," I said. I could see her smile faltering. "Your relationship with Mark. Don't lie." Her eyes darted away, and in that moment, I knew the power had shifted. She had been so careful, so smug, thinking I would never suspect. But now, I held the truth. It was complicated," she stammered, her voice breaking slightly. "I didn't mean for this to happen." I held up my journal. "You don't get to explain. I have proof. Every message, every call, every lie documented. You made a choice. And now, we're going to see it through." Her lips quivered. "What are you going to do?" I smiled, faint but cold. What I should have done the moment I realized I was being betrayed. "The truth will come out. And you will see what it means to cross me." That night, I started quietly sharing pieces of evidence with a few trusted family members, siblings, a cousin, the kind of people who would not stand for deceit. Their reactions were immediate: shock, disbelief, anger. And slowly, word began to spread. Mark noticed the subtle shift almost immediately. Invitations to family dinners became tense, questions were asked he couldn't answer, subtle glances exchanged between family members let him know the walls were closing in. He tried to deflect, to charm, to explain away his behavior, but the combined weight of evidence and collective judgment was inescapable. Clara tried to manipulate it, of course. She called me, pleading, threatening, crying. "You're ruining everything," she shouted once, the desperation in her voice unmistakable. But I didn't falter. I stayed calm, collected. I let her unravel, letting the truth stand on its own. The climax came one Sunday, during a family gathering meant to celebrate Clara's recovery. It was ironic, almost cinematic. Here she was, the picture of health and vitality, the result of my sacrifice, surrounded by everyone she had lied to, everyone who had admired her courage. I stood quietly as conversations flowed, then, at the right moment, I addressed the room. My voice was calm, measured, but it carried. "I think it's time everyone here knows the truth. About the sacrifices we make, about trust, about love. And about betrayal." Eyes turned to me, the room falling silent. I handed out printed copies of messages, call logs, subtle hints of intimacy that couldn't be denied. Clara's face drained of color, Mark's jaw tightened, and the room buzzed with murmurs. The aftermath was quiet, devastating, and just. Clara's friends and relatives recoiled, asking questions she could no longer answer. Mark's reputation among family and close friends took a blow he couldn't repair. And I felt an unexpected sense of calm. Not joy, not triumph, but peace. I hadn't yelled, I hadn't screamed, I hadn't sought petty revenge. I had simply let the truth speak for itself. I realized that the true power of my act wasn't in exposing them, but in reclaiming my own dignity. I had faced betrayal with clarity and strength, and in that clarity, I discovered a part of myself I hadn't known existed. The days that followed were still tense, but life slowly began to return to a semblance of normal. Clara moved out, quietly, without the confrontation I had feared. Mark stayed, but our marriage could not recover. It was over, not with anger or drama, but with the quiet acceptance of a love that had been irrevocably broken. I focused on myself, on rebuilding my life, my home, my sense of trust in the world. I spent evenings tending the garden, walking in the park, cooking meals that were just for me, savoring the simple, untainted moments of life. The pain didn't vanish overnight, but it softened, like sunlight filtering through clouds after a storm. Life after the storm was quieter than I expected. No dramatic confrontations, no shouting matches, just the steady hum of a home reclaiming itself. The first few weeks were strange. I would sit in the living room, the sunlight drifting across the floorboards, and feel the absence of Mark and Clara's secret world. At first, it felt almost too silent, too empty. But slowly, I began to understand that silence could be healing. I focused on rebuilding myself, not just emotionally, but physically. My body had been through surgery, through exhaustion, through betrayal, and it deserved care. I returned to my routines, early morning walks, a strong cup of coffee while reading the newspaper, evenings in the kitchen experimenting with new recipes. I rediscovered the small joys that had been buried under months of stress and grief. Even as I pieced my life together, reminders of the past lingered. I would see a flash of Clara's smile in a magazine ad, hear the cadence of Mark's laugh on television, and for a moment, my chest would tighten. But each time, I reminded myself, that chapter was closed. What I had done, my sacrifice, my courage in facing betrayal, had defined me, not them. Friends noticed the change in me. There was a calmness in my demeanor, a quiet strength that had been absent before. One afternoon, my neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, stopped by with a basket of freshly baked muffins. "You seem lighter," she said, settling into a chair across from me. "I can't explain it, but you carry yourself differently." I smiled, taking a bite of muffin. "I suppose I've learned something important," I said. "About trust, about love, about knowing when to walk away and when to stand firm." Explanation, but my body wouldn't move. My mind spiraled through disbelief, denial, and heartbreak all at once. I backed away slowly, tears blurring my vision, the taste of iron in my mouth. My gift, my kidney, my sacrifice, had become the stage for their betrayal. Every ounce of love I had poured into my sister, every moment of trust, every late-night vigil, every prayer I whispered over her hospital bed, mocked by the very people I loved. I spent the night awake, replaying every glance, every laugh, every gesture I had brushed off as harmless. Each memory now seemed tainted, each kind word a lie. And somewhere deep inside me, beneath the shock, a quiet, simmering anger began to take root. I realized then, lying on that bed, staring at the ceiling with tears drying on my cheeks, that nothing would ever be the same. Not my marriage. Not my sisterhood. Not my sense of self. And I also realized something else: I wouldn't let this betrayal define me. The days after that night were a strange blend of routine and inner chaos. On the outside, I smiled, I nodded, I played the part of the recovering sister and dutiful wife. But inside, a storm raged. Every laugh between Clara and Mark felt like a dagger twisting in my chest. Every casual comment, every shared secret, reminded me that my love, my sacrifice, had been taken for granted. I tried to focus on my healing. The incision was closing, my strength returning, but emotional wounds are far trickier to mend. I spent hours sitting by the window, hands wrapped around a cup of tea, watching neighbors walk their dogs, kids chasing each other down the street, couples holding hands without a care. I wondered how easily some people could love, and how easily mine had been twisted into something unrecognizable. I had accepted that our paths were different. I had given life once, literally, and that was enough. My sister would live, and I would live, on separate paths, without bitterness. It was in that acceptance, in that quiet dignity, that I finally felt free. I had faced the darkness of betrayal, confronted it with courage, and allowed the truth to reveal itself without me losing my humanity. I had chosen myself, not out of selfishness, but out of survival and integrity. At night, when the house is quiet and the moonlight spills across the floorboards, I sometimes think about that moment in the garden, the one conversation I overheard that changed everything. I remember the anger, the heartbreak, the disbelief. And I smile now, not at them, not at their misdeeds, but at myself. At the woman who survived, who reclaimed her life, who learned that love and sacrifice are not debts to be exploited, but gifts to be cherished. Healing, I've learned, isn't about forgetting. It's about understanding, accepting, and moving forward with grace. It's about trusting yourself again, believing in your own strength, and knowing that the future can be brighter than the past. The public reckoning didn't come overnight, but when it did, it was quiet, inevitable, and just. I never sought to humiliate Clara or Mark. I had learned that dignity is far more powerful than drama. Instead, I allowed the truth, carefully documented, to surface naturally. It began with family gatherings. Relatives who had once admired Clara's vivacity began asking questions, subtle at first, then more direct. "Are you okay, really?" they asked me. "We've heard things." And I answered truthfully, calmly, without anger. I simply presented the facts, letting the proof speak for itself. The messages, the late-night calls, the intimate exchanges, all laid out, undeniable, undeniable. Mark tried to deflect, tried to charm, tried to plead ignorance, but no one believed him. His closest friends, those who had seen the little nuances I had been watching for months, shook their heads. Clara's circle began to unravel as well. Whispers spread about how she had taken advantage of my kindness, my recovery, my very body, and the admiration turned to disbelief and condemnation. The turning point came during a family brunch at my aunt's house. Clara had been avoiding public appearances, but she couldn't avoid the truth any longer. I arrived first, calm, serene, my presence quietly commanding. Guests trickled in, and the tension was palpable. Clara walked in, smiling, hoping perhaps to deflect suspicion. Mark followed, stiff, trying to appear casual. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the past months, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the sleepless nights, and allowed it to settle into a calm determination. When conversation lagged, I spoke. "I want everyone here to know something important. About trust. About sacrifice. And about betrayal." Eyes turned to me. I held their gaze, unwavering. "A few months ago, I underwent surgery to donate a kidney to someone I loved. That person is my sister, Clara. I gave her a part of myself so she could live. But during my recovery, she and my husband began an affair. Every message, every late-night call, every deceitful smile documented and undeniable." A hush fell over the room. Clara's face paled. Mark's jaw tightened. And slowly, the whispers began. Family members, those I had quietly informed, started confirming what they had noticed. The truth, once hidden, now hovered in the air, impossible to ignore. Clara tried to speak, her voice trembling. It wasn't planned. We didn't mean for this to happen." I shook my head gently, feeling a calm I had never known. The intention doesn't erase the betrayal. It doesn't erase the fact that they used my love and my sacrifice as justification for their actions. In the days that followed, the ripple effect spread further. Friends who had supported Clara and Mark quietly distanced themselves. Mutual acquaintances began asking questions, seeking clarity. Clara's social circle dwindled. Mark, once respected, faced subtle ostracization. It wasn't public shaming on social media, there was no need, but it was a quiet, enduring consequence. People who valued honesty and integrity saw the truth and adjusted their trust accordingly. For me, the satisfaction was not in their downfall, but in the restoration of balance. I had faced betrayal, yes, but I had done so with composure, with evidence, and with the moral high ground intact. I hadn't screamed, I hadn't retaliated in petty ways, but I had reclaimed my life, my dignity, and my peace of mind. I began to rebuild my relationships on my own terms. Friends who had been distant grew closer, seeing the strength I had demonstrated. Neighbors stopped by to check on me, to offer support, to share stories of resilience. The garden, once a quiet refuge, became a place of social gatherings again, not because of Clara or Mark, but because I had chosen to live, to thrive, and to welcome joy back into my life. I also found time to focus on myself. Yoga in the mornings, long walks at dusk, reading novels I had long postponed. I reconnected with passions I had shelved, painting, music, volunteering. Each act was a small reclaiming of my identity, a reminder that my life was no longer defined by the betrayal I had endured, but by the choices I made in its aftermath. Mark attempted to contact me several times during this period, messages that alternated between apologies and pleas. I read them once, then archived them. I didn't respond. My peace wasn't for negotiation. My dignity wasn't up for debate. Clara eventually moved to another city, quietly, without fanfare, without confrontation. There were no dramatic apologies, no cinematic goodbyes. Just the quiet distance that came naturally when truth prevails and deceit cannot sustain itself. I noticed something remarkable during this period of separation. The absence of drama brought clarity. Without the tension, without the constant reminder of their betrayal, I could see the strength I had gained. I could see how my love, selfless, true, unwavering, had been twisted, yes, but had not been destroyed. It had survived, and in surviving, it had transformed me. I began mentoring a local support group for women who had faced betrayal, infidelity, deceit, family conflict. Sharing my story became a way to reclaim my voice, to help others navigate the treacherous waters I had crossed. I realized that my experience, while painful, could serve as a guide for others, a testament to the power of calm, measured action, and self-respect. By the time the first anniversary of my surgery came around, I was no longer haunted by anger. I remembered the morning I woke in that hospital bed, proud of what I had done for Clara, yet naive about the betrayal awaiting me. I had feared the worst, and yet, through patience, truth, and dignity, I had navigated the darkness. I stood in my garden that morning, the sun warming my shoulders, the smell of blooming flowers drifting in the air, and I realized something profound. Betrayal is painful, yes, but it is not permanent. What we choose to do after the betrayal defines us far more than the betrayal itself. The months that followed were a quiet kind of renaissance. My home, once filled with tension and secrets, now resonated with calm. The sunlight streamed in unchallenged, the hum of daily life no longer accompanied by whispers of deceit. I spent mornings in the garden, tending to the roses and tulips that had been my solace. The petals felt soft beneath my fingers, alive, growing steadily, and I drew comfort from their resilience. I realized healing isn't a dramatic process. It's incremental, small victories stacked quietly upon one another. I could walk through my home without flinching at memories. I could laugh again without guilt. I could cook dinner for myself without the shadow of betrayal looming in the kitchen. Each act, mundane as it seemed, was a step toward reclaiming my life. Mark was gone from my life, of course. He had tried a few final attempts at contact, but I ignored them. I had learned something vital: closure comes from within, not from apologies or explanations. Forgiveness was possible, yes, but reconciliation was not necessary. Some wounds do not require reopening, they require learning, understanding, and moving forward. I found joy in solitude and self-discovery. I took long walks in the park, listening to the wind rustle through the trees, feeling my heartbeat steady, the rhythm of life moving forward around me. I reconnected with old friends, with passions I had abandoned for domestic comfort, and I nurtured a sense of independence I hadn't fully realized before. One afternoon, I decided to visit Clara, not to confront, not to accuse, but simply to observe how life had moved on. She lived in a small apartment in another city. From a distance, I watched her in the window, carrying groceries, laughing on the phone. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel triumph. I felt something rarer: peace. I had survived her betrayal. I had endured heartbreak and emerged stronger. Her choices no longer had power over me. I continued to write in my journal, reflecting on the journey that had brought me here. Every entry was filled with honesty, with the emotions I had felt: love, fear, grief, and finally, acceptance. I learned that self-worth is not contingent on others' actions. My kindness, my sacrifice, my love, those things were never diminished by betrayal. They were simply redirected, transformed into lessons and strength. Months turned into a year. On the anniversary of my surgery, I walked to the hospital where it had all begun. I sat in the quiet garden, watching patients and families pass by. Some were scared, some hopeful, some filled with the same anticipation and fear I had felt before the operation. And I realized that life had given me a second gift, not just to Clara, but to myself: resilience, clarity, and an unshakable sense of self. I thought back to the moment I first realized the betrayal, the hurt so sharp it made me question everything. And I smiled softly. That moment had been devastating, yes, but it had also been transformative. It forced me to confront truths I had ignored, to set boundaries I had avoided, and to reclaim the woman I had been beneath layers of care and compromise. I began volunteering at the hospital, mentoring patients who were undergoing transplants. I shared my story carefully, focusing not on scandal or betrayal, but on resilience, on courage, and on the power of self-love. Women would often approach me afterward, eyes wet, seeking advice or simply someone who understood the complicated mix of love, sacrifice, and heartbreak. I offered them what I had learned, that life can be cruel, but we are capable of enduring and of finding light in the darkness. There were quiet victories, too. Friends who had drifted away returned, drawn by the calm and strength I now embodied. My garden flourished, each bloom a testament to patience and care. And most importantly, I discovered a joy that had nothing to do with anyone else, the simple, undeniable happiness of being fully myself, unshaken by the chaos others tried to impose. I even found love again, in unexpected ways, not the hurried passion that once clouded judgment, but a slow, steady warmth with someone who respected me, valued honesty, and understood the depth of my experiences. This time, I didn't give blindly. I gave carefully, with eyes wide open, and my heart stayed intact, healed and wiser. The moral I carry now is simple but profound: betrayal is not the end of the story, it is a chapter, painful but instructive. We have the power to decide how it shapes us. We can let it define us, or we can let it teach us, strengthen us, and ultimately lead us to lives richer than before. As I sit in my garden now, sunlight on my face, the scent of flowers drifting around me, I think about the choices I made, the sacrifices I offered, and the courage it took to confront truth without losing my dignity. And I am grateful, not for the betrayal, not for the pain, but for the strength it awakened in me. Life has a way of returning balance when we hold fast to our principles, and I have learned to trust that process. I have learned that kindness and sacrifice are never wasted, even if misunderstood or exploited. And I have learned, most importantly, that my life is my own, and that nothing, not even betrayal by those we love most, can take that away. As I sit here in my garden, watching the sunlight dance on the petals, I often think about the choices we make when love and betrayal collide. I gave my sister a part of myself, and yes, she and my husband betrayed that trust. But I've learned that the measure of a person is not in how they are hurt, but in how they rise after the fall. Healing isn't about forgetting the pain, or pretending the betrayal never happened. It's about acknowledging it, confronting it, and choosing to move forward with dignity and self-respect. I could have reacted with anger, with vengeance, with destruction, but I chose something quieter, something stronger, truth and calm. And in doing so, I found freedom. I share my story not to humiliate or shame, but to remind anyone who has faced betrayal that your strength is far greater than the actions of those who wrong you. You can survive. You can rebuild. You can reclaim your life and find peace, even when it feels impossible. So I ask you, gently, if you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Would you have confronted the truth quietly, like I did, or acted differently? Life doesn't always go the way we expect. It tests us, challenges us, and sometimes breaks us. But in those moments, we discover what we're truly made of. And in the end, that is what matters most. If my story resonates with you, or if you've faced a betrayal that changed everything, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more stories of real-life heartbreak, resilience, and redemption, subscribe and join this community where we honor truth, strength, and the quiet power of the human heart.